Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Leviticus chapter 14, verses 1 through 57. Getting closer to Christmas. The Lord spoke to Moses. This is the law of the diseased person on the day of his purification when he is brought to the priest. The priest is to go outside the camp and examine the infection. If the infection of the diseased person has been healed, then the priest will command that 2 live clean birds, a piece of cedar wood, a scrap of crimson fabric, and some twigs of hyssop be taken up for the one being cleansed. The priest will then command that 1 bird be slaughtered into a clay vessel over fresh water. Then he is to take the live bird along with a piece of cedar wood, the scrap of crimson fabric, and the twigs of hyssop, and he is to dip them in the live bird in the blood of the bird slaughtered over the fresh water, and sprinkle it 7 times on the one being cleansed from the disease. Pronounce him clean, and send the live bird away over the open countryside. The one being cleansed must then wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe in water, and so be clean. Then afterward he may enter the camp, but he must live outside his tent 7 days. When the 7th day comes, he must shave all his hair, his head, his beard, his eyebrows, all his hair, and he must wash his clothes, bathe his body in water, and so be clean. On the 8th day, he must take 2 flawless male lambs, 1 flawless yearling female lamb, 3/10 of an ephah of choice wheat flour as a grain offering, mixed with olive oil, and 1 log of olive oil. And the priest who pronounces him clean will have the man who is being cleansed stand along with these offerings before the Lord at the entrance of the meeting tent. The priest is to take 1 male lamb and present it for a guilt offering along with the log of olive oil, and present them as a wave offering before the Lord. He must then slaughter the male lamb in the place where the sin offering and the burnt offering are slaughtered, in the sanctuary, because, like the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest. It is most holy. Then the priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of the right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest will then take some of the log of olive oil and pour it into his own left hand. Then the priest is to dip his right forefinger into the olive oil that is in his left hand, and sprinkle some of the olive oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord. The priest will then put some of the rest of the olive oil that is in his hand on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the blood of the guilt offering. And the remainder of the olive oil that is in his hand, the priest is to put on the head of the one being cleansed. So the priest is to make atonement for him before the Lord. The priest must then perform the sin offering and make atonement for the one being cleansed from his impurity. After that, he is to slaughter the burnt offering. And the priest is to offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. So the priest is to make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If the person is poor and does not have sufficient means, he must take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering, for a wave offering, to make atonement for himself. 1/10 of an ephah of choice wheat flour mixed with olive oil, for a grain offering, a log of olive oil, and 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, which are within his means. One will be a sin offering, and the other a burnt offering. On the 8th day, you must bring them for his purification to the priest at the entrance of the meeting tent before the Lord. And the priest is to take the male lamb of the guilt offering and the log of olive oil, and wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he is to slaughter the male lamb of the guilt offering, and the priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest will then pour some of the olive oil into his own left hand, and sprinkle some of the olive oil that is in his left hand with his right forefinger 7 times before the Lord. Then the priest is to put some of the olive oil that is in his hand on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the place of the blood of the guilt offering. And the remainder of the olive oil that is in his hand is to be put on the head of the one being cleansed to make atonement for him before the Lord. He will then make 1 of the turtle doves or young pigeons, which are within his means, a sin offering, and the other a burnt offering, along with the grain offering. So the priest is to make atonement for the one being cleansed before the Lord. This is the law of the one in whom there is a diseased infection, who does not have a sufficient means for his purification. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. When you enter the land of Canaan, which I am about to give to you for possession, and I put a diseased infection in a house in the land you are to possess. Then whoever owns the house must come and declare to the priest, something like an infection is visible to me in the house. Then the priest will command that the house be cleared, before the priest enters to examine the infection, so that everything in the house does not become unclean, and afterward the priest will enter to examine the house. He is to examine the infection, and if the infection in the walls of the house consists of a yellowish green or reddish eruptions, and it appears to be deeper than the surface of the wall, then the priest is to go out of the house to the doorway of the house and quarantine the house for 7 days. The priest must return on the 7th day and examine it, and if the infection has spread in the walls of the house, then the priest is to command that the stones that had the infection in them to be pulled and thrown outside the city into an unclean place. Then he is to have the house scraped all around on the inside, and the plaster which is scraped off must be dumped outside the city into an unclean place. They are then to take other stones and replace those stones, and he is to take other plaster and replaster the house. If the infection returns and breaks out in the house after he has pulled out the stones, scraped the house, and it is replastered, the priest is to come and examine it. And if the infection has spread in the house, it is a malignant disease in the house, it is unclean. He must tear down the house, its stones, its wood, and all the plaster of the house, and bring all of it outside the city to an unclean place. Anyone who enters the house all the days the priest has quarantined it will be unclean until evening. Anyone who lies down in the house must wash his clothes. Anyone who eats in the house must wash his clothes. If, however, the priest enters and examines it, and the infection has not spread in the house after the house has been replastered, then the priest is to pronounce the house clean, because the infection has been healed. Then he is to take 2 birds, a piece of cedar wood, a scrap of crimson fabric, and some twigs of hyssop to decontaminate the house. And he is to slaughter 1 bird into a clay vessel over fresh water. He must then take the piece of cedar wood, the twigs of hyssop, the scrap of crimson fabric, and the live bird, and dip them in the blood of the slaughtered bird and in the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. So he is to decontaminate the house with the blood of the bird, the fresh water, the live bird, the piece of cedar wood, the twigs of hyssop, and the scraps of crimson fabric. And he is to send the live bird away outside the city into the open countryside. So he is to make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. This is the law for all diseased infections, for skull, for the diseased garment, for the house, for the swelling, for the scab, and for the bright spot, to teach when something is unclean and when it is clean. This is the law of dealing with infectious diseases. I've heard this said before, not sure where, but that there was some link between uncleanness and sin, particularly like with these diseases, that it was used as like an analogy for sin, an analogy for dog. Okay, we're good now. Okay, yeah, not to say that it was necessarily sinful to be like in these, to just have a disease, but that it provided a good analogy for the state that sin leaves us in. That is, for the leprous man, he was outside of the camp. It broke communion with the rest of the body of believers. And yeah, so in that way, it provided a very real separation between the person who had the disease, who was unclean, and those who weren't. And then you have kind of an interesting sacrifice being um, uh, being given here, which is you have these two birds, hey, and one is a one is being sacrificed for the other, and the live one is being dipped in that and being sent away as kind of like this substitutionary atonement picture. Also, you have hyssop there, which is a symbol for healing. So, all really cool symbology, in my opinion. Carrying on, Mark chapter 6, verse 30 through verse 56. Then the apostles gathered round Jesus and told him everything they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come with me privately to an isolated place and rest a while, for many were coming and going, and there was no time to eat. So they went away by themselves in a boat to some remote place. But many saw them leaving and recognized them, and they hurried on foot from all the towns and arrived there ahead of them. As Jesus came ashore, he saw the large crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he taught them many things. When it was already late, his disciples came to him and said, 'This is an isolated place, and it is already very late. Send them away so that they can go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy something for themselves to eat.' But he answered them, 'You give them something to eat.' And they said, 'Should we go and buy bread for 200 silver coins and give it to them to eat?' He said to them, 'How many loaves do you have?' 'Go and see.' When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he directed them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they reclined in groups of hundreds and fifties. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. He gave them to his disciples to serve the people, and he divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up the broken pieces and fish that were left over, 12 baskets full. Now there were 5,000 men who ate the bread. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dispersed the crowd. After saying goodbye to them, he went to the mountain to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. He saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. As the night was ending, he came to them walking on the sea, for he wanted to pass by them. When they saw him walking out on the water, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them, 'Have courage, it is I. Do not be afraid.' Then he went up with them into the boat, and the wind ceased. They were completely astonished, because they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. After they had crossed over, they came to a land at Gennesaret and anchored there. As they got out of the boat, people immediately recognized Jesus. They ran through that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever he was rumored to be. And wherever he would go, into towns, villages, or countryside, they would place the sick in the marketplace and would ask him if they could just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. So, this all starts with Jesus saying to his disciples, "Come with me privately to an isolated place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and there was no time to eat. So they went away by themselves to an isolated place. But even in this isolated place, many hurried there so that there was a crowd. And in Mark 6:34, as Jesus came ashore, he saw the large crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he taught them many things. So Jesus certainly had a heart of compassion for lost and broken people. Also, you have the feeding of the 5,000 there, which again is similar to the Exodus narrative, in that in the same way God provided manna from heaven for the Israelites in their journey through the wilderness, so too Jesus in this desolate place provided food for everybody to eat. And also, he had control over the wind and water in the next story, and healed their infirmities. And yeah, carrying on, Psalm chapter 40, verses 1 through 10. I relied completely on the Lord, and he turned toward me and heard my cry for help. He lifted me out of the watery pit, out of the slimy mud. He placed my feet on a rock and gave me secure footing. He gave me reason to sing a new song, praising our God. May many see what God has done, so that they might swear allegiance to him and trust in the Lord. How blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord and does not seek help from the proud or from liars. O Lord my God, you have accomplished many things. You have done amazing things and carried out your purposes for us. No one can thwart you. I want to declare them and talk about them, but they are too numerous to recount. Receiving sacrifices and offerings are not your primary concern. You make that quite clear to me. You do not ask for burnt sacrifices and sin offerings. Then I say, look, I come. What is written in the scroll pertains to me. I want to do what pleases you, my God. Your law dominates my thoughts. I have told the great assembly about your justice. Look, I spare no words, O Lord. You know this is true. I have not failed to tell about your justice. I spoke about your reliability and deliverance. I have not neglected to tell the great assembly about your loyal love and faithfulness. It's interesting. Psalm 47 and 8 seems awfully messianic to me. Look, I come. What is written in the scroll pertains to me. I want to do what pleases you, my God. Your law dominates my thoughts. And you had that same sort of thing happening when Jesus reads the scroll of the prophet Isaiah and says that today this has been fulfilled within your hearing. That is, what is written in the scroll pertains to me. Yeah. And finally, Proverbs chapter 10, verses 11 and 12. The teaching of the righteous is the fountain of life, but the speech of the wicked conceals violence. Hatred stirs up dissension, but love covers over all transgressions. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.